Hey class, in this video, this is part two of chapter 12 for food safety concerns. In the last video, if you remember, we kind of looked at identifying what are foodborne illnesses. We looked at some examples, some of the major or the more common pathogens, disease-causing agents, bacteria. We saw some different examples there, viruses, fungi, all these different things that could potentially contaminate our food. Part two is going to look at more of preventing foodborne illnesses. And it really starts out giving us some very good points and suggestions and just techniques and things to try to make sure that our food is safe, especially if we are the ones that are preparing food, especially if we are the ones even purchasing food. If you're doing the grocery store shopping in your household, then this is kind of some things here to look for. And so a lot of this is just kind of some checklists, some just helpful hints, tips, techniques, and things that we're going to be looking at, such as, um, you may never have thought about it if you're the one purchasing food, if you're doing the shopping, when are we getting those items into our shopping cart? The idea is, if it's cold, if it's a frozen food, or if it's very perishable, it's cold, we need to try to keep it cold as long as possible. And so the idea is, hey, if we could, delay picking those things out to the end of our shopping trip, then that would, hopefully minimize the time that they have the chance to kind of get warmed up. And we're going to talk about kind of the danger zone of temperatures a little bit later. So get those frozen foods last. Kind of organize your list a little bit if you've got a shopping list. Definitely, obviously, check those dates on perishable foods, and so make sure that they may not have had any kind of they have any spoilage or anything that's taken place. Look for those containers. Make sure that there's not damage. We mentioned on the last video, there is, even though it's probably very rare, there's a possibility of seeing canned food that maybe got contaminated or didn't seal correctly and may had anaerobic type bacteria inside of the container that has, pushed the lid outward or pushed the can and even caused the can to swell a little bit. So make sure that the container is intact, that it has not been breached. Of course, we're probably checking our eggs and the cartons and things like that. There's a suggestion here to only purchase pasteurized milk, cheese, fruit, and vegetable juices, things that go through the process of pasteurization. And so, I know some individuals like unpasteurized products because, they like the flavor more, or they feel like it's healthier. But the general suggestion is to get these products pasteurized so that they go through that process to hopefully kill off any of the harmful microorganisms. And then how often do we, kind of think about this if you're shopping for meat, fish, poultry, those types of items along the meat section there? Are we using those plastic bags to separate those? Because, even though they may be wrapped in plastic already, sometimes there could be some leakage there. And so that's cross-contaminating things within even our own shopping cart. So, how are we putting things in the shopping cart? Are we using those extra bags or separate bags to place items in that potentially could contaminate other things? Where are we placing them in our shopping cart? That could be another area of cross-contamination. And so, separating out those things like your fresh vegetables and fruits and the meats and things should be kept separate, even in our shopping carts. Anytime that we're shopping, we want to make sure we get those perishable items, those colder items home promptly. And so, and they even suggest storing eggs in their original carton. That helps them stay protected, right? So, like if you had the refrigerator, the little plastic egg tray or egg holder, a lot of times we use those. The idea here is if we can store them in the original carton, they stay a little more protected, but they also help to insulate and keep those items colder. A lot of times we're putting those eggs right on the door side of the refrigerator, and that's generally the section of the refrigerator that could change temperatures a little faster because you're opening the door of the refrigerator, and so it's could potentially warm up a little bit more. So if you can put your eggs in a different location or keep them in that insulated carton, that will help them kind of stay a little cooler. So what about before preparing our food? And a lot of these are very uh, um, basic type of suggestions, things that we are probably already doing, but they're very important to mention here. Of course, we want to wash our hands, and we definitely want to try to have some warm soapy water, and roughly 20 seconds. That's kind of the idea. Are we cleaning our surfaces, our preparation surfaces, areas where we're preparing food, meat, vegetables, fruits, whatever? Are we preparing that before it ever contacts food? What kind of surfaces are we using? Are we using cutting boards? Cutting boards can be a source of contamination if they're not kept clean. And so, a lot of people have wooden cutting boards, and I do too. But you need to make sure that they are kept clean, because sometimes that wood can absorb um, uh, the contaminated areas of the food, and so you got to be careful about even wooden surfaces. So usually they recommend having plastic cutting boards, or I've never had a marble or glass cutting board, but usually plastic is usually what a lot of people have now. But even if you have wood, make sure it is cleaned with hot soapy water. You can use a little bit of mineral oil to coat that with, and so kind of think about that. Are we separating out our food preparation areas based on fresh fruits and vegetables, based on breads, based on meats, fish, poultry? Are we even having separate cutting boards for those items? So preventing some cross contamination, of course, is critical as well. And then, are we, sanitizing correctly? Are we cleaning those surfaces correctly after they come in contact with any kind of raw meats and even eggs and things like that? Just about every time you crack an egg, you're gonna have some of the egg drip out onto whatever surface that you're cracking it, whether it's a cutting board or a countertop or wherever. So are we going back, not just wiping it off, but are we going back and using some kind of disinfectant and a sanitizing type agent as we're preparing food? There again, watch that container, make sure that containers, even though hopefully we got it home from the grocery store, everything was fine, but if it was stored for a while before we're using it, check those dates again. Make sure that the seals are intact. Make sure that the jar or can or whatever it's in is still intact. Um, and make sure, of course, if there's any kind of bad odor, smell that that's an indication that there's probably some kind of contamination, probably bacterial or fungal type contamination in that food source. And always make sure that we're reading the labels that are there to make sure how are we supposed to store it, right? So a lot of things you'll see refrigerate after opening. So we want to make sure that after you've breached that seal, after you've opened the seal, are we storing it at the correct temperature? Does it need a particular temperature, or does it need to be refrigerated or not? Whenever you're, especially looking at fruits and vegetables, are we rinsing things off, washing things off, before we're using them in our food preparation areas, washing under running water? We think of things like fresh lettuce or greens and things that we get. Are we rinsing those? Even things that are already prepackaged. If you get a bag salad, a prepackaged salad lettuce mix or something like that, it's better to go ahead and rinse that ahead of time. Once you're ready to prepare it or use it, rinse that as well, because there could be not only dirt, it could be pesticides maybe that are still present. So we want to make sure we're washing our fresh produce with running water. And of course, we want to watch out for molds on our foods, especially breads and things. This is, maybe you've heard this before. When in doubt, throw it out. That's very important. I know the cost of food is expensive. I see it in my grocery bill, and so I don't want to waste things for sure. But if I'm not sure if it has a little odor to it, or if it doesn't look correct, and if it's breached or something like that, I would rather throw it out than risk some type of food poisoning. Now, temperature is critical for food preparation, food storage, and so make sure you kind of take a look at this. It's a nice little chart or figure here. The idea is that microorganisms, and some of you may have had the microbiology class, microorganisms most of the time grow very well between around 40 degrees, this is Fahrenheit, up to about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And so, our body temperature, that's 98.6 Fahrenheit, 37 degrees Celsius. A lot of times, if you're taking microbiology and you're trying to culture something on, like a little petri dish, you're going to probably use an incubator that's set to about 37 degrees Celsius, maybe a little bit cooler, but that's right about body temperature. And so microbes grow well in these, remember, the warm, the moist environments. And so these are kind of those danger zone temperatures because they're going to allow microbes to really thrive in that temperature. So anytime food is exposed to 40 to 140, we need to make sure that we're working with it quickly, that if we're storing it, that our refrigeration temperature is below that 40 degrees. Of course, here in the figure here, we've got 32 degrees. That's our freezing mark there on the Fahrenheit scale. And so this is kind of your safe refrigerator temperature right there between 32 and 40 degrees. And then you need your freezer below 0 degrees, or right around the 0 mark, somewhere in there. So and then cooking food, above the 140 is going to destroy most organisms. Most microbial organisms will be destroyed. Now, we'll talk about food preservation techniques in the next section, but sometimes that's a higher temperature up in this scale here. In other words, there are certain microbes that produce spores that may survive higher than this even 212 degrees at boiling point. And so there's ways to get your food preservation techniques. In other words, if you're doing home canning, you may need to use, and we'll talk about this in the next video, you may need to use a pressure canner to reach temperatures above that boiling temperature. And that's to make sure that you don't have any surviving spores from the microbes that could survive and start growing again. Be careful about microwave cooking, only because it can, as you know, produce uneven temperatures. So like one section of the food may be at the correct temperature. It may have another section of it that is cooler or hasn't reached the proper temperature yet. So you do need to, most microwaves are going to kind of rotate around, and so you can check the temperature in different places. You don't necessarily have to memorize these. You've probably seen something like this before. These are recommended minimum internal temperatures for a lot of dishes and food items. That's recommended. Notice that poultry, chicken, for example, or turkey, or this is the highest here, about 165. Eggs about 160, ground meat about 160, pork, fish, steaks all about 145. A lot of kitchens, a lot of folks have some type of thermometer, meat thermometer or cooking thermometer. A lot of times, now you've got digital thermometers that are very, very easy to use. Go to Amazon, you can find them very, very inexpensive there. And, it's good to have in the kitchen while we're preparing food, something that we can get a quick check on to make sure we're at or above these recommended temperatures. A few of the things to kind of think about: how are we thawing out foods in the refrigerator? Or are we thawing out food. So we got something stored in the freezer. Now we want to cook it, but now we have to let it thaw out. And so the recommendation is to thaw those, especially high risk foods. So maybe you had some frozen chicken. At the time that I'm recording this, it's almost Thanksgiving, and so a lot of people have a frozen turkey. Or if you go to the grocery store, you buy that frozen turkey, and it's frozen solid. But it's a high risk type food because it's poultry, and so you need a way to thaw it out. It's best to thaw it in the refrigerator. That allows it to come to its, start to thaw kind of slowly. But if you need to speed that up, you can use cold water. Probably not putting the turkey in the microwave, but you could put certain things in the microwave on a defrost type setting. What it's trying to say is try to avoid leaving frozen foods that you're trying to thaw, especially those high risk foods, out on the counter just at room temperature. So because you're exposing that food item to room temperature, and that's kind of in that danger zone, that 40 to 140 degrees. So you don't want to thaw that turkey out just at room temperature. You want to speed it up by either running it under water or allowing it to thaw in the refrigerator. After foods have thawed completely, then we want to go ahead and process them. We want to go ahead and cook them, and because they're now ready to cook, they're probably right around that 40-degree area, and so they need to go ahead and be processed and cooked. As we're in the kitchen, if you're preparing meals, if you're using things like marinades to flavor fish or meats or whatever that you're cooking, use that and then discard it. You don't want to keep it. You don't want to reuse it or anything like that. And so just kind of keep things, these are kind of common sense type of food safety tips that we've probably have been using, but just some things to kind of remind us. Of course, never use the same plate again that held the raw product. If we're grilling some food and we've got steaks or hamburgers or something like that out on a plate, and we go cook those meats and things, we don't want to put those raw. We don't want to cook. We don't want to put the cooked food back onto that same plate that had the raw product. Is the idea there. And in general, we're thinking about making sure that cold foods stay cold and hot foods stay hot. I'm not a big fish consumer. I know that fish, certain fish, and certain ways that it's prepared can be very healthy, but I'm just not a big fish eater, and I don't eat raw fish. Just that's just my personal preference, but I know a lot of people do, and so usually it's not a problem. Just make sure that the fish is very fresh when you purchase the fish there, and that you're going to reputable places that have been inspected, have high standards for quality. If you're eating raw fish and sushi dishes, ground meats, poultry, and fish. Problem here could be mainly because that the product is ground up, and so that kind of mixes all the meat together. In other words, so you've got potentially more possibility of contamination in a ground meat versus something that has not been ground together. And so just make sure that if you're using some kind of ground meat or poultry product, that it is cooked thoroughly through, and that it has reached the correct temperature there. And so they kind of give you a few other suggestions there as to some of the things: cook beef, poultry, pork, thick pieces of fish, egg-containing dishes thoroughly, cook eggs until the yolk and white solidify. Do not wash the poultry before cooking it. Stuff the bird. This is so that you're not contaminating anything else. If you wash and some water contaminates other places in your kitchen or sink or something like that. If you're going to use stuffing and stuff the poultry, you want to do that immediately before cooking. You want to make sure that the stuffing is at its proper temperature and things. And anytime that you can bake the stuffing separately, that's probably the way to go. Remember that the foodborne pathogens we've been talking about, mainly bacteria, they do thrive at room temperature. That's their ideal area, and there's some exceptions. I think I mentioned on the last video something about listeria tends to do just fine in a little bit cooler temperatures. So we do have to be careful about things like leftovers, and so you want to refrigerate or freeze any kind of leftovers, within a few hours of serving. The idea is you want to allow it to cool down some, but you want to try to get that out of that danger temperature zone as quickly as you can. And so they suggest separating things out if that helps to cool the food down a little faster. Having separate pans, that would just be something a suggestion, kind of cool things down a little faster. What about perishable items? Cook and freeze ground meats and poultry soon after purchasing. So in other words, don't just leave them in your refrigerator for weeks. They need to either be processed cooked or they need to be frozen. And then even faster there, if it's raw fish, shellfish, you need to go ahead and poultry the same day that you get it, just because they're on the high risk kind of food category. Refrigerated, the ground meats, you need to kind of use those within a couple of days. And then, how long are we leaving leftovers in the refrigerator? So you kind of keep an eye on that. You should kind of use up any leftovers within a few days. A good place to get more information is there's plenty of lots of resources online. Foodsafety.gov is a great place. The USDA, of course, you can check CDC for if there's any recalls on food items. You'll hear about recalls on the news, or again, you can check CDC. A lot of times they'll mention, hey, this product has been recalled in this location, and they'll tell you why. If there's some kind of contamination, whether it's Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria, bacterial contamination that's been found. Recently there was E. coli, I believe it was, contamination at McDonald's, and so that was on the news not too long ago. So just kind of keep an eye out for information. These are 4 main steps that you can find here at foodsafety.gov, and it's also on a USDA information sheet that we'll be looking at. Clean, separate, cook, and chill. Clean, make sure everything's clean, including yourself, your hands, your utensils and things, your plates, your surfaces, your cutting boards. Clean those often. Separate, not making sure you're not cross-contaminating. Cooking to the proper temperature, and chilling things, refrigerating promptly to try to avoid that danger zone temperature of 40 to 140. We'll have one more relatively short video for this chapter, and that will kind of look at food preservation techniques.